Rabbi Amy Bernstein, Senior Rabbi of Keilat Israel and Pacific Palisades. I'm a Vice President of the Board of Rabbis, and I'm very happy to be given the honor of introducing Rabbi Sarah Bassin, who is currently at Temple Emanuel of Beverly Hills as the Associate Rabbi, and before that served as Executive Director of the LA-based New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish Partnership for Change, which has been given many accolades, and under her leadership, it won Faith-Based Organization of the Year. She is a change agent, she's an innovator, and we are very excited to have her inspire us to be the same forces for change in our communities. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. So first of all, it's really great to be here with all of you. Just a little bit about the through thread of my career from New Grounds, this joint Muslim-Jewish partnership, to my work at Temple Emanuel. One of the most important things that New Ground rests upon is the idea that conflict is natural, inevitable, and a healthy part of every relationship. And the whole idea of New Ground is to build a notion of constructive conflict into the joint Muslim and Jewish relationship and to show that we have resilience through it. Well, guess what? That's not only a Jewish-Muslim problem, that's an intercultural problem, it's an American problem, and it's an intra-Jewish problem. I think that our culture has gotten to a place that when we engage with conflict, our expectation or our hope of what we get out of conflict is validation. We want people to agree with us. We want to feel like we are being reinforced and justified when we enter into conflict. And what our tradition teaches us is that's actually not the reason why we're supposed to engage. Conflict is a generative process to help us question our own beliefs, become sharper in responses to criticism, and on occasion, yes, change our minds. So conflict has the ability and naturally is a positive force in our society, and we are not used to relating to it in that way. So my purpose at Temple Emanuel, my through thread of my rabbinate, is to help us engage with conflict differently than the way that society at large has set us up to. Yes, the pastoral stuff, yes, the preaching and teens and all of that, but really fundamentally, if I have a rabbinic mission, it's to help us relate to conflict differently. So a couple of things we're going to do today. I'm going to throw some resources at you. We're not going to dive that deeply into text because I want us to really focus on the practical ways of changing our relationship to conflict in our own communities. I'm going to share with you how I built a particular program at Temple Emanuel, and I'm going to point to Rabbi Geller to talk about the lived experience of it, both its benefits and its deficiencies. And then at the end, we're going to move into a case study that one of you is going to bring. And I'm going to model some of those facilitation techniques, and then we're going to take a step back and kind of look at what just happened in that moment. But before we begin, I want to know, with that framework, does anybody have a word or a sentence on something that you're bringing to the table? Don't describe to me the whole culture of your everything and your milieu, but is there just a word or a sentence of something that you feel like you're wrestling with that you hope to get out of this conversation today?
Frustration.
Frustration with? A little more context, Ron.
Oh, you asked for a short.
I know, a little more.
Just why don't some people get what's wrong? You know, why is it so hard for them to open their eyes to the trajectory that we're moving in, and why do they justify or rationalize it or make excuses for it or apologize for it?
Okay, so a concern of like ideological digging in and how to move people beyond that.
Sure.
Great.
Well, maybe that's sort of the same issue, but I'm chaplain at the YMCA in La Cañada. That's one of the things I do. And I'm often swimming in the pool, and I hear these horrendous political arguments. And I want to know, is there a way to talk to people who think there's no other way to have them, you know what I'm saying? I mean, why is it so...
How to encourage people to engage in a constructive conflict.
Yeah, as opposed to, you suck, you know.
Great.
You know.
constructive rather than destructive conflict.
Yeah.
Great.
So maybe building on that right now, I find it's very easy right now to engage with conflict with people I agree with.
Right.
So how do you engage with conflict with people that you don't agree with, or even bring them together?
Amazing. He's a total plant. Thank you. That's great. What else?
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, Arthur.
How to deal with the fraying of relationships over the conflict.
Great.
And the avoidance that's taking place with the fear of any kind of engagement.
Amazing, amazing. That this doesn't stop at the issue, that this undermines relationships of 20 plus years.
How to create an atmosphere where relationships are not broken because we disagree.
Right. Resilience through conflicts and hanging in there with people. Great.
No, I was just going to say, how do we honor each other and our families and still, not be on the same page with our families?
Great. Any others? Great. Okay. So the resources that I'm going to point you to and then move beyond very quickly. The first is the colorful packet on your tables. It's also the link that's right at the top of this sheet. So this is the sheet with the super small type. If you have poor eyesight, you can yell at me afterwards. You're welcome to do so. The sheet with the super small type is what we're going to kind of be going through.
We need more of this.
If somebody has extras over here, if they would
We have extras.
redistribute accordingly. But the link under resources at the top of this thing is this. What is this? This is the Jewish Day of Constructive Conflict, the 9th of Adar. It's produced by Pardes. What is it about? It is, has anybody used this, first of all? No?
No.
Okay, tell us how you use, who you are and how you use this. Or
Nora Feinstein. I'm a student at HUC, and in Israel this past year, we had a seminar about how we could potentially use it, but I didn't actually use it.
Okay, great. So what is this document? It discusses how the conflict that we celebrate so much between Hillel and Shammai, there's actually a minority thread of discussion through the Talmud of how this turned into a violent massacre between Hillel and Shammai. Who knew? That's there, right?
The problem about reading to the end of a sukkah.
So why is this important and useful? Because we as Jews celebrate how much we disagree in Makhloket, L'Shem Shamayim, and Elu Ve'elu. I don't need to give you those texts and why we hold minority opinions. That's all there. You know that. That's fine. It's fragile. This whole notion of engaging in disagreement, it's a really fragile space that we have to work to cultivate and hold. And it can turn into violence if we aren't thoughtful about how we hold that space. So I'm not going to get into these texts, but just enjoy them. You can go on to, or you can just Google 9th Adar. You can download these texts, and as an added benefit, yesterday I did this. I re-downloaded them. Amy Eilberg reached out to me, and she said, hey, through internet stalking and my data, I saw that you just downloaded this. Do you need help? So not only do you get the text, but you can also get some rabbinic assistance in thinking through how you might frame it. I highly encourage that. The link below is in your resource sheet here, is the Barron Conversation. What is the Barron Conversation? It's the blue document on your page. This is the program that we built at Temple Emanuel of trying to build a culture of constructive conflicts. This particular conversation that's recorded, it's about an hour and a half, was between the number 2 at J Street and the Jewish communal spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron. Okay? These are not two people who ideologically agree. Rabbi Geller, can you say 2 words about that program and what was different about it from what you've seen of other debates?
So what was different is that Rabbi Bassin started by giving rules about how the people in the synagogue needed to behave. And she was very clear. And at one point, somebody began to violate the rule, and she basically said, if you don't stop right now, we're going to ask you to leave. I have never seen the clarity or the quickness of declaring a certain kind of behavior unacceptable, and we've never kicked anybody out of the synagogue before. She was ready to kick that. It was amazing. It changed the culture completely.
So this was what Rabbi Geller's like main takeaway was like, oh my gosh, this one facilitation technique, okay? This was one of about 7 or 8 things that laid the groundwork for a different type of conversation. Most of the time when you see people who engage in, this person and this person on the same stage, it's set up as a debate, right? And when it's set up as a debate, they're not actually speaking to each other, they're speaking to their bases, right? They're there to get the applause, they're there to, rile up their bases, get everybody excited. They're not actually there for a thoughtful exchange of ideas. So that was not our goal with this conversation. So I'm going to speak to how we laid the groundwork to even get there in the first place, and to have my congregation okay with bringing in a settler from Hebron and somebody from J Street, right? How we got there in the first place, and then the techniques from the event itself, okay? So framing and building support. Skip over the text. You guys are rabbis. You can figure all that stuff out, okay? Right, go to framing and building support on your super small type sheet. The first things I did, number 1, we all, as rabbis, have one sermon that we give over and over and over, right? Our kind of default that we go back to. My sermon that I give over and over is about constructive conflicts. That you're going to disagree with your partner, your loved ones, politics, whatever. Bring humility. Understand you have something to learn. Bring patience, bring love, etc., etc. So I have given a subtle message for the 3 years that I've been at Temple Emanuel through probably about 5-6 sermons a year, where this is the message that I am preaching. And it starts to lay a groundwork for the importance of conflict in our community. When I brought this idea to the board, everybody agrees about the brokenness of society, how we listen to our echo chambers, how tragic that is. Okay, so let's do something about it. Let's figure out a way that we can model constructive conflict. What are the ground rules that we want to set for ourselves? What are the red lines that we want to set for ourselves? This wasn't codified in any formal way, but the red lines that Temple Emanuel set for itself was that we are not going to invite anybody who actively advocates violence. That gives me a lot of leeway, right, with who I actually invite. And then I have the support of my lay leadership when I invite somebody who others are upset about or feel is outside of the pale. I also invited them to offer recommendations. Where is the conversation? Where is our community broken? Where do we need to have these difficult conversations? I guarantee you, with my political leanings, I did not have a relationship to get this settler from the Jewish community of Hebron. That was not me. That was one of my congregants who said, hey, I was at APAC and there was this really interesting guy. We should figure out how to bring him in. And I said, great. Let's figure out how to bring him in. We're going to bring him in and we're going to put him with J Street. Had I just brought in J Street, would I have gotten yelled at?
Yes.
Okay. Had I just brought in the settler, would I have gotten yelled at?
You wouldn't have succeeded in bringing in the settler.
Right. Yeah. So you create a culture of buy-in, that there's a problem, that we want to solve it, and that we're going to have to push ourselves outside of our own comfort zones if we are going to work to address it. With the marketing that we sent out to the community, again, we re-emphasize this problem. Our culture is broken. We celebrate that we have conflict in our community, right? That we elu ve'elu. Do we actually buy into it? Do we actually do it? No. You come to this event, you will be uncomfortable. Set up people's expectations. Set them up to know that they're going to feel something that is going to upset them. Because when you tell them that they're going to get upset, they're less upset when they are upset. And that's huge. If you don't set the expectation that they're going to be uncomfortable, then they're going to resent you for making them feel uncomfortable in that space. If you do the opposite, if you tell them, you should pat yourselves on the back for feeling uncomfortable. Nobody else in our culture is doing this. You need to demonstrate that you can do this and feel good about it. It's going to give them a totally different relationship to how they engage in that moment of feeling uncomfortable. Okay, setting it up with the speakers. It's very important, too, to set the tone with them of what you're trying to achieve. Speakers are always happy to look for a debate and to rile up their bases. That's not what this was about. So when I sent out the invitations, I told them my primary goal in my community is to create a culture of constructive conflict, period, right? That means that I want ideas to engage with each other. It changes their disposition when they come. I made sure that the speakers meet each other beforehand so that they humanize each other. And it's really beautiful because in the moment itself, right, of actually being on stage, I found that the speakers did a better job of policing themselves. And even before I had to step in with some of the yelling and the screaming and the cheering that was happening at the very beginning, the speaker did so himself. He said, listen, thank you for your applause. I appreciate it, but I want to respect the tone that Rabbi Bassin is trying to set. You got to do it with your leadership. You got to do it with the audience. You got to do it with the speakers. You're going to feel like you're hitting a hammer over the head, a nail over the head with a hammer over and over. But I can't emphasize enough how much people need to internalize this. Any questions so far about the groundwork? Pushback? This would never work in my community? Yeah.
How did you get the J Street person and the settler to agree to talk to each other?
They had actually already had a conversation on his show, on Yishai Fleischer's The Settlers radio show, or somebody had, I don't know, arranged it before. So they had never met in person, but they themselves as individuals were predisposed to being in dialogue with each other. There are plenty of speakers who would not, and those are not speakers that you want in this situation. Whatever the perspective is, you can find somebody who's going to buy into these ground rules. Just make sure you invite those people.
So far, we had a question come back to you.
Okay.
What are the ground, I mean, the 7, I'm curious what the ground rules you told.
Zach, thank you. Okay, next, flip over the page. This is great. Okay, so at the event itself, how do you set it up so that everybody buys into what you're doing? I cannot emphasize enough that it's not okay to just say, okay, we're all gonna be nice, we're gonna listen to these speakers, let's go. That's not enough. I spent at least 10 minutes of the first of the program not introducing the speakers, but of laying the ground rules. So what did I do? I said, thank you so much for coming. I reinforced expectations. You are going to hear things tonight that will upset you and make you feel uncomfortable. And that's the point. That is why you are here. You are here to spiritually stretch. You are here to try to understand the idea that you vehemently disagree with. You are not here to cheer on your side or to boo the other. And let me be clear, applause and booing are not welcome in this space. That is not the tone that we are trying to set. It takes only one person to destroy the tone that we are trying to set for the community. So I ask that everybody please refrain from applause and enter into this with the idea that you are trying to understand the other perspective. If it becomes too difficult for you to stay in your seat, we understand. We ask that you take a deep breath, step outside, and when you are ready, we welcome you to rejoin us. Don't shame people if they feel like it's too much for what they're hearing. Give them the permission to step outside if they need to and welcome them back into the conversation. But first and foremost, uphold that the tone of the conversation is what's primary. And then finally, the last of the ground rules to set is to make sure that everybody agrees. So this is one thing that the first time I did it, Rabbi Geller was like, I've never seen that before. I have every person in the room, whether it's 70 or 300, I say, again, I'm just going to reinforce these are the ground rules. No cheering or no booing, to listen with resilience, and to step outside if you need a moment of composure. Can we all agree to these ground rules? And I wait for the acknowledgement. So what does this do? It creates a culture of buy-in, and most importantly, of self-policing. So if somebody does start to clap, before I even have to intervene, somebody next to them is going to shush them or put their hand. And this is even for people who ideologically agree, right? The couple of outbursts that happened, that didn't control it. The speaker intervenes, that didn't control it. I stepped in, and importantly, a security guard started to hover. That helped, okay? So you do need force, potentially, or at least the idea of force. And again, the more you share clear expectations, the safer people will feel in this space. So you should say at some point too, like if you are unable to abide by these rules, we will ask that security step forward and to remove you from the room in order to ensure the tone for the rest of the community. So when you set all those expectations, what happens if you don't is people get, oh, I can't believe they picked on that person, and now I'm going to start getting riled up. But if one person violates, everybody else can still stay on board with you. So you see, that's not a short introduction, right? It's definitely not a short introduction, but it's helpful and important to hold the tone. The second thing that's important is the facilitation in the actual moment. And again, you might not do this exact program. That's fine. But these skills and these ideas of how you facilitate do translate into different settings, and that's part of what we're going to talk about in the case studies. So what's important about facilitation? You as the facilitator need to give yourself the permission to interrupt, okay? And say, I apologize in advance, but I, as the facilitator, retain the right to get people back on track or to speak to the concerns. So, forgive me in advance if I interrupt. Because what are speakers used to doing? They're used to being in debates. They go on their soliloquies, they go on their talking points, they're not talking to each other, and that's not actually helpful. So you give yourself permission to interrupt. Again, the speakers won't resent you, and the audience won't feel like you're being unfair. That does require that you have to have some level of self-awareness about your own biases that you're bringing to the table and your propensity to interrupt one speaker over the other. You can do your best to monitor that and then ask for feedback afterwards about how fair you were, right? There were a couple of times I'm sure that I was not fair. I asked for feedback and tried to modify that for the next time. When it does start to get riled up.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Do you prep the speakers and say, I'm going to be interrupting you if things get...
Yeah, I prep them both at the dinner, and then I prep them in front of the audience and say, I will be interrupting you.
Have you gotten pushback from them?
No. So I'll give you a moment of when this actually happened and how I handled the conflict. So there was one point where the settler in the conversation, he was starting to get more riled up, and his energy level was right. He had a little bit of spittle coming out of his mouth. He was going on the soliloquy. What did I do? He's shy. He's shy. He's shy. He's shy. He's shy until he stopped, right? So what was the tactic there? I did not match his escalation in energy. As he was escalating, my calmness was a reminder that he was going off the line, right? And my persistence let him know that he was not to continue, right? Like, this was not a helpful trajectory for him to go down. It works.
And he apologized.
Yeah. He took a moment, he took a deep breath, he was getting emotional, he recentered, he said, I'm sorry, you're right. And then I turned it over to the other speaker to be able to respond so that he could have a moment to regain composure. But that's very important in facilitating. You're not going to succeed by matching the escalation either of the audience or of the speakers on stage. You have to be that grounding presence that models the level of the conversation that you want. And don't respond, don't shy away from pointed criticisms, right? There are people in the community who are going to start to get riled up because you're not addressing your concern or you're not asking that question that they need to ask. Make sure that you ask the questions that's on people's mind, right? Do it in a respectful way. Let them respond, but don't let the elephant in the room go unaddressed because that's going to make people feel like you wasted their time by bringing that speaker in and not actually addressing the concern. Any thoughts or responses or like I'm having trouble with, or again, like that wouldn't work in my community because?
What is looking at the elephant in the room look like? So can you give an example of what it, don't shy away from the pointed question?
Okay, so with the settler, I spoke out of personal experience and I said, Yishai, when I went to Hebron, I saw this thing that really disturbed me and I want you to respond to it in terms of how the community views this now. When I went to the gravesite of Baruch Goldstein, and I saw that there were rocks that were placed on his gravesite that were honoring the memory of this murderer, it made me feel ashamed to be a Jew. And that was a really hard moment for me. Can you speak to what that is in your community and what that means, right? Didn't say it in an accusing way. I said, this was my personal experience. Can you speak to that? right? Did I hear a few in the community? Sure. But like the level of trust and what Yishai understood I was trying to do in that moment sustained it.
What kind of answer did you get?
He went to, that was 25 years ago, right? Like that's yeah, everybody has to go back that far to point to our community. If I had been really good in that moment of facilitation, right, I would have said, you're right. I'm not asking about that moment of violence. I'm asking about the community's response to that violence and their veneration of violence. I didn't have the wherewithal in that moment, right? But that would have been like kind of an active interjection in following up. Good. Other thoughts, questions? Yes?
Can you say how you handle questions from the audience?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Always great point. Do not let the wackos get up and hold the mic. Okay, how many times have we all dealt with that? Have the questions written down, right? Have somebody filter through them that you trust, but let a whack job question in, right? Just you be the one that asks it or reframes it slightly. Again, you want to be able to speak to people's concerns, and they're going to get riled up if those concerns aren't addressed, but do not hand over the microphone in a contentious conversation.
So you do all that ahead of time. You get the questions, and
No, people have blank note cards, and somebody's walking around and collecting them.
But then you look at them.
In the moment, I am evaluating. Yeah, which that's why having somebody filter through them before, you can either group them or whatever can be helpful. Yeah. Other thoughts? Okay. So, yeah.
How did you, I'm curious, how the event sounds very intriguing. I'm curious about, was there an opportunity to debrief? Because the challenge in bringing in just a contentious conversation in an effort to actually address a meta problem, the broken down discourse, is that all you end up doing is really addressing the debate that happened that night and not the culture overall.
Right. Directly, no. Indirectly, yes. The mini course that I taught that year was on religion and violence, right? And exploring these texts in our own tradition and others' tradition, and how do we relate to like these kind of more extreme views that come up, which is essentially like how do we deal with conflict within the context of our tradition. So people who like were energized or riled up by that experience, that was the place that I channeled them into in terms of a follow-up conversation. Not everybody's interested in a follow-up conversation. I will say, really, the most important thing is just about modeling the fact that this can be done and giving people the faith that what we're seeing out in the larger public sphere, that does not have to be the tone that's set.
How long was your course? Was it a one-off, or do you give four sessions?
There's a 4-part
Same
series.
audience?
Yeah, 4 sessions, same audience, trust
Large
me.
or small?
20 people.
Oh, okay, it's a group.
Yeah.
So what was the result in terms of people, ideas expanding or mindsets changing?
So people loved it. Did anybody change their minds? No. And in fact, like I checked in with people. I was like, so what do you think of like what happened? Who did a better job? Right? Because they still frame it as a debate. If you were already in agreement with somebody, you thought that they won. Right? Like people still kind of reinforce their perspectives, but people also acknowledge points from the other side. In terms of the larger culture at Temple Emanuel, there's really gaining excitement around this whole notion, and that we're occupying a unique space in this way, and there's support for the conversation moving forward. So next year, in terms of the Israel conversation, the difficult Israel conversation that we're having Mickey Gitson, who heads the New Israel Fund in Israel, in conversation with Shmuel Rosner, who's a conservative columnist, and they're going to be speaking about whether or not Jews in the diaspora have a role to play in the conversation in Israel. And they very much disagree with each other on that question. It's not only about Israel. We had a conversation where it was me in conversation with a Chabad rabbi. What do we have to learn from Chabad? What are our sticking points? What's hard? Again, a respectful dialogue, a little bit different of a model. One conversation that did not happen, that's actually on your sheets, is the boycott, divestment, sanctions conversation. We were hoping to have a conversation that said, look, here's the range of Jewish communal responses. on how we're dealing with this thing that we feel iffy about of boycott, divestment, sanctions. First and foremost, I didn't feel like our community was ready for Jewish Voices for Peace in that space. Even if we drew the red line at we welcome anybody who does not advocate violence, I thought we needed a little bit more practice before we got there. But what was even clear is that the community that agrees that boycott, divestment, sanctions is problematic, but has different feelings on how to approach it, they're not ready to air their dirty laundry about it. So we had a pre-conversation with people that fell apart, and we abandoned that as an idea. So you've got to respond to what's actually possible and what's actually feasible. Don't try to force it if it's not going to come. You see how delicate it is that you've got to have a lot of these different things lined up in order to have a successful recipe for one of these programs. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about what you were saying about the audience and not allowing them to ask questions, which I think is a good idea. I'm just wondering, is there a space, so on a college campus, I would imagine that would be hard for a lot of the students not to ask, is there space to create an opportunity for the people in the audience to talk to each other or ask questions of each other in this sort of the same way?
Yeah, I think that would be a great thing for us to imagine as a second step. I do think, again, even when you're talking about smaller conversations, that facilitation is still important because people are not practiced enough. So I could imagine a scenario where that large thing turns into smaller group conversations, where there's still ground rules that are laid. With where we are communally and collectively, I would not feel comfortable turning it over and say, talk to your neighbor just yet. Unless, well, people usually do divide, whatever. Yeah.
This is helpful because I'm doing a conversation on campus about BES. And I'm very clear about nothing you said, and very clear I'm not going to have anybody with a microphone. It will just be cars moving in. But it's important, what you said is, I cannot pick those only that I think are intellectual.
Right.
Because then the emotional ones will go crazy.
Right.
And I'm not proud of that. And that's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you filter the emotional ones or rephrase them, or do you try?
I rephrase them.
Oh, you do? Okay, so
I rephrase them, yeah. Yeah, because they're phrased in whack job ways, right? So that's not actually helpful to bring into that space. So yes.
And just to be clear, Sarah didn't go through them all while she was moderating. Somebody else kind of
Collected and clustered,
And
yeah.
so it was easier for her to do that. So you can't have the facilitator also be the one to thoughtfully go through all. Somebody else has to be trusted enough to do the work.
Yeah, and by the way, the person I trusted was my senior rabbi, who's more politically conservative than I was, to make sure that we had that eye that was brought in, and it wasn't just reliant on my,
And people saw that, and they know that about Jonathan Aaron, and so there was actually even comfort to know that he was the one that was standing with questions.
Right. Okay, any other kind of questions? Otherwise, we're going to step into one of your case studies. And what we're going to do is, like, you're going to bring a case study. I'm going to model strong facilitation around this case study using like a mechanism I'll teach you called a hot tamale. And then afterwards, we'll evaluate how that went and just kind of pinpoint things. So we'll do it, we'll benefit from the ideas that come out of that, and then we'll also have the meta reflection on it, okay? So is anybody struggling with an issue around conflict in their community that you would benefit from the feedback of your colleagues? Think of a specific example. The more specific, the better. Yeah, Arthur.
I think the...
So actually, I'm gonna pause, and here's the thing. You've got at the bottom of your sheet here, we're going to follow this model. So Arthur, you're gonna have 2 minutes to describe your problem uninterrupted. And then we're going to have an opportunity for people to ask clarifying questions. So I'm timing you, and I'm going to stop you right at 2 minutes.
A very wealthy, successful couple, both are very strong individuals, have actually stopped communicating over the Trump issue. They feel that their relationship is at risk. They've not sought any type of intervention. These are members of my community, major members of my community. And the question is, how can I help them? Do I stay out of it? Do I get involved? What tools can I bring
ask clarifying questions of this particular situation.
Have they asked?
She has been calling me, but not really asking for help, just sharing with me that nothing's happening, and she's very worried about the relationship. So one could say, I interpret that as a call for help, but not an actual call for help.
Have they had issues around politics before? Is this
No, first
this is
time.
new?
First time.
How long have they been married?
Over 30 years. So,
Whoa.
yeah. This is the first time ever.
But this is one couple, it's not two couples.
No, one husband and wife. He's the Trump, she's not.
He's what?
He's pro-Trump, she is not.
He's
And
what?
can't-
He's pro-Trump, she is not.
Yeah, we couldn't get it out loud enough.
So I want to leave the room. I want to leave the room for clarifying questions. Keep going.
Do they have children?
Yes,
And are the children involved in this story at all?
children, the son feels unsafe.
That's what I thought.
And they've also said that they've not seen the other person this way ever before. It's strange.
How old are the children?
Roughly.
22, one.
And how much risk do you feel there is for them to not resolve the conflict?
I think that the fear level is so high that they've actually changed their behavior towards each other. And that, I think, makes the risk. There's no longer the trust, no longer the respect in some ways for each other.
Is there a risk to the community?
No.
Do you know where you are in terms of this, what you want to see happen, whether they ask for it or not?
The question, do I have an agenda? What will be my agenda?
Yeah.
My agenda would be to create an environment where they can share it, because I think what's happened, it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. And that if they can just share it and see each other as the loving people that they are, remember that, it will still be conflict, but one that will not start to dominate the relationship and undermine the relationship.
Other clarifying questions?
When you said that there was fear, you know, there's fear, and that it could be dangerous, are you referring to physical
No.
violence or
No.
just damage to the relationship
Damage to the
and the
relationship.
family?
Okay. So we're going to transition now into the duct tape portion, which means, Arthur, you get to say absolutely nothing. You will sit there and listen as you get feedback from your colleagues. Even if they continue to ask you questions, you'll have a moment to respond afterwards. But this is a moment for you guys to share your insights with Arthur about questions he should ask or things that he should consider, or even recommendations. Go ahead.
Have you talked to the husband?
Nope,
I'm
nope.
sorry. I wonder, Arthur, if you, I heard you say you talked to the wife, but the wife called you. So I just sort of wonder if you've thought about either asking the wife if you could talk to the husband, or if you've already talked to the husband.
I guess with 30 years of them being in relationship together, to try to draw on the treasures, that over the years they must have built up a treasure chest of experiences and memories that have brought them close together, and to try to draw on all of those and bring those to more primacy.
Given that the wife called you, perhaps you could ask her if they would want to come in together and talk about this with you as a first step.
It might be difficult to ask how they've handled conflict before, you know, when it's been bad, and to ask the question, is it possible that some of this political stuff is actually based in something else shifting in the relationship?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder if before having them meet together, to meet with them individually, kind of get a little bit of their unedited versions of what's really going on. And then at that point, because I'm assuming that you've had a relationship with this couple for a while, that they would have to meet with you and speak with you out of respect and meet, nothing else. And then hopefully there's something to
To borrow the hot data, why is this difference different than all other differences? I mean, in other words, I'm wondering if they've probably had some other ways in which they find themselves fundamentally different before that didn't cause this rift. So what is making this particular difference between them so problematic?
I'd be curious to know whether you see this as regular old marriage counseling, whether you do marriage counseling, whether that's something that the congregation typically would turn to you for, or whether this is something that another kind of professional besides a clergy person might be involved.
You know, I was along those lines. And I didn't say anything until you did, just because I was intimidated. But I was thinking more in terms of a more informal, like inviting them to coffee together, not in your office, kind of under the guise of just having some time with them as a couple because they're the congregants, and seeing organically kind of what comes of that.
I was wondering, you didn't give any indication, but if either of the partners, if they have any affiliations, like political affiliations outside the home, which is exacerbating this conflict.
Okay. Arthur, would you share with us a little bit of what this feedback has inspired in you, different things that are percolating for you, or questions you're asking?
In terms of normal type of marriage counseling, where it's easy to bring both together, this is not what I found. She does not want me to talk with him. She's fearful that I could push things over. Though she's a very strong individual. It's the first time that she's ever felt, admonished to not with what's going on. They've gone through a lot of stuff together. And they've built a very vibrant family structure, a lot of wealth and so forth together.
Are there
It's the first time that they're seen, that they both say, I can't understand you.
Are there insights from the conversation that has emerged that does feel like it might be something you could pursue, or questions that you are more asking yourself?
Well, I think that the one that I think I'm going to try and help her with is to take time to go back. I like going back to their treasure chest of experiences, to remind them of those good times. And then technique I've often used is then for her to hold his hand and to say, I got to have feeling afraid, to actually articulate that to him. And I'm not sure I'm a good resource for basic marriage counseling. I think this is not my strength in this case. I think there's more going on. I don't think I can say that. That'd be very easy to say that. But I think they can have something who's better in this area. So I think the treasure one talking and acknowledging, sharing that, I think that would be a good way to begin for them to find another path.
Okay. So I want to take a step back from this experience overall, just to kind of meta look at it, right? So at the beginning, again, just revealing the magician's tricks, what I articulated what to expect of how this was going to unfold. There was a moment in clarifying questions where we all kind of got caught up, right? Because we've been familiar with that, right? But that's not what that space was for. So I quashed that in order to create, again, the space for the original purpose. I will say that your clarifying questions were great. Usually I have to get into a space of steering people to say that sounds like a suggestion. Is there something that you want clarified? And then in the input, right, all great. You self-edited based on the rules. Oh wait, I can't ask a question right now. That's not what this space is for. So here is my input instead. And then in your response, you'll notice that I re-steered you a little bit because your first impulse was to say, well, that's not going to work because, right? And then to move you into the space of, but was there anything that does feel like it got you entrenched? You'll notice that in kind of every moment I felt comfortable in interjecting as the facilitator and in reinforcing what I articulated that space was for, okay? This is just to show that these facilitation techniques, they're for the bima, they're for conversations. This little hot tamales thing is a great way to problem solve through cases with everybody else and stops it from turning into a terrible corporate brainstorm. So just reflecting back on that. Again, kind of overall trajectory of the things that I'm hoping that you do take away. Again, tapping back into that initial purpose of we can reframe conflict from being a destructive force in our culture to being a natural, inevitable, and healthy part of every relationship. The most important thing that we can do in order to help facilitate that is to set people up for the expectations that feeling uncomfortable is not only okay, it's an important part of our growth, and to reinforce that, and to make sure that you're paying attention to all of those small little things that are necessary in order to create that culture of constructive conflict. So I am happy to, yes.
There's one thing that wasn't addressed.
Yes.
That emerges from, your description. You talked several times about fear, that she's afraid, that she fears, etc., etc. And what is she afraid of? That hasn't been clarified. That the relationship will break up?
Yes.
A physical violence?
No.
So that the relationship will break up?
Right.
Thank you.
And I think that is the underlying fear, whether we're talking about the interpersonal level or at the cultural level of the way that conflict enters into our lives. And we can create a space for people to gain a greater resilience, to build their skills in conflict, and also help other people become more resilient in conflict. So thank you. I'll stick around for any sort of specific questions that you might have afterwards.